Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Philip Emeagwali. I began programming supercomputers on June 20, 1974 in Corvallis, Oregon, United States. I began supercomputing with one of the world's fastest supercomputers that was at 1800 Southwest Campus Way, Corvallis, Oregon, United States. That supercomputer was the first to be rated at 1 million instructions per second. As a 19-year-old supercomputer programmer, I felt like a small boy that was in charge of a big ocean liner that turns slowly. 3 weeks after I began programming supercomputers, I was on the cover of a newspaper that circulated in the cities of Monmouth and Independence, Oregon. I became a local celebrity. Over the years, I realized that in Africa, a breakthrough technology is a sacred object. The African that invents a groundbreaking technology can occupy the position between Albert Einstein and Nelson Mandela and occupy that position in the minds of Africans at home and in the diaspora. That African inventor is invited to sit on the African high table. The invention of the fastest supercomputer is a concrete and visible achievement that everybody understands as pushing the frontier of technology as well as the boundary of human knowledge. The act of inventing is the courage to try the untried. Everything I invented changed me. I was never the same person after an invention. Before 1989, the year I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing, I was described as a research mathematician or a research physicist. After I experimentally discovered massively parallel processing, I was redefined as a research supercomputer scientist. But it took me 16 years, onward of June 20, 1974, to be mentioned in the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal and to become a supercomputer scientist that invented a new supercomputer. It took me 16 years of dedication, discipline, and unpaid hard work to become a supercomputer inventor that is the subject of school reports. On the 4th of July of 1989, I experimentally discovered how and why parallel processing makes computers faster and makes supercomputers fastest. Since that discovery, I really don't know what I should or was best known for. The inventor is a prisoner of his invention and somewhat need an outsider to fully explain his invention to him. Back in 1974, I had a blurry vision of the parallel processing supercomputer that is a new internet de facto, and that is not a new computer per se, that I invented in the 1980s. I needed the distance in time and space to gain clarity and understand that I am the only father of the internet that invented a new internet. A story in the June 14, 1976 issue of the Computer World magazine was titled, quote, "Research in Parallel Processing questioned as waste of time," unquote. To the Computer World magazine, to invent parallel processing was to show that massively parallel processing the toughest problems in supercomputing is not a waste of time. I was in the news in 1989 because I experimentally discovered how to save time and how to do so by reducing 65,536 days or 180 years of time to solution on one processor that is not a member of an ensemble of processors, and reducing that time to only 1 day of time to solution across an ensemble of 65,536 processors that were the building blocks of a new supercomputer. That experimental discovery was recognized in the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal. The achievement was recognized because I experimentally discovered that the impossible to compute is in fact possible to compute. At the granite core of my experimental discovery that occurred at 10:15 a.m. New York time, Tuesday, the 4th of July of 1989, the U.S. Independence Day, was my one-to-one mapping of my 65,536 initial boundary value problems of modern mathematics and computational physics, and my mapping of those problems to as many commodity off-the-shelf processors that defined and outlined a new internet. Prior to that experimental discovery of the 4th of July of 1989, the mechanism by which 64 binary thousand computational physics codes were synchronously emailed to as many processors remained unknown. That experimental discovery of the 4th of July of 1989 put to rest the saying that parallel processing is a beautiful theory that lacked experimental confirmation. It takes 8 minutes to describe how I mapped 8 initial boundary value problems of modern calculus and computational physics and mapped them onto 8 processors that were a subset of the 64 binary thousand processors that I visualized as evenly distributed across a small copy of the internet that enshrouded a small globe. At that rate of 8 minutes for 8 processors, it will take me 10,000 lectures to describe how I experimentally mapped 2 to the power 16 processors across a new internet that's a global network of 65,536 processors. Looking back from June 20, 1974 in Corvallis, Oregon, United States, my lone search for what makes computers faster and for what makes supercomputers fastest was like going into the Sambisa forest of northern Nigeria alone and in search for the elusive Chibok girls that were held hostage by Boko Haram fighters. Parallel processing was the holy grail and the Chibok girls of supercomputing. Searching for the fastest parallel processing supercomputer was like walking at night and along an uncharted road in the Sambisa forest of northern Nigeria, and doing so armed against Boko Haram fighters with only a small lantern. As we struggle to solve the grand challenges of massively parallel processing supercomputing, we reveal more grand challenges such as quantum computing. On the 4th of July of 1989, I experimentally discovered parallel processing, and therefore nobody else can experimentally discover parallel processing again. What was overlooked in the news headlines was that my world record speed of 3.1 billion calculations per second in 1989 was verified by the Computer Society of the IEEE, the largest society of computer professionals. My world's fastest calculation was verified as evenly spread across 65,536 commodity processors or CPUs, with each CPU contributing 47,303 calculations per second. The 4th of July of 1989, the US Independence Day, was the day I experimentally discovered the world's fastest computation and discovered it across a massively parallel processing supercomputer that is the precursor to the modern supercomputer of today that hopefully will become the computer of tomorrow. There are 3 methods that I could use to decompose the oil field that my petroleum reservoir simulation represented to experimentally discover the fastest computation across my ensemble of processors, demanded that I achieve a 1-to-1 nearest neighbor mapping of my 64 binary thousand initial boundary value problems to my as many commodity processors. In my first method, called slab decomposition, I divided my 3-dimensional oil field into 65,536 one-dimensional slabs or oil blocks. In my second method, called pencil decomposition, I divided my 3-dimensional oil field into 65,536 2-dimensional pencils or oil blocks. In my third method, called block decomposition, I divided my three-dimensional oil field into 65,536 three-dimensional oil blocks. This analogy represents what we knew about parallel processing during the early 1970s. What I believed in the 1970s was that my email must travel across 65,530 processors to be delivered to a processor that's 5 processors apart. My 1970s thinking was that if I try to send and receive 65,536 emails at once, that I will fail in sending them all. And as I intellectually matured as a research mathematician and as a research supercomputer scientist, I discovered that a computer screen comprising of 256 by 256 pixels or 65,536 cells can be coded with circularity. In layperson's terms, circularity means that the lower edge of the screen touches the upper edge of the screen. That circularity occurs when the right side of the screen touches the left side of the screen. I coded circularity into my email messaging in the 16th dimension, not in the 2 dimensions that I described. But I applied the same concept of circularity in the 16th dimension, and I did so in part to enable me to record previously unrecorded speeds in floating point arithmetical calculations. That circularity was in the granite core of my world's fastest calculation that was heard around the world. My experimental discovery of massively parallel processing was the news headlines because I recorded the world's fastest calculation, and I recorded it by solving 65,536 problems at once. That experimental discovery of a new supercomputer made the news headlines in 1989, and it was recorded in the June 20, 1990 issue of the Wall Street Journal, and was in the June 27, 1990 issue of the Chronicle of Higher Education, the publication that distributes news to universities.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.